The Galactic Consortium prided itself on many things: technological advancement, cultural diversity, and most importantly, its ability to categorize absolutely everything. From planetary classifications to the nutritional value of space plankton, if it existed in the known universe, the consortium had a committee dedicated to labeling, filing, and regulating it. Perhaps their most dubious achievement was the combat classification system, a supposedly comprehensive ranking of every sentient species based on their combat capabilities. The system had been established over 3 centuries ago, after the infamous Glax incident wherein 17 different species claimed sovereignty over a resource-rich asteroid belt, resulting in what became known as the Bureaucratic War, a conflict fought primarily with strongly worded communiques and trade sanctions, but occasionally escalating to actual violence. To prevent future conflicts, the consortium created a hierarchy that would, in theory, establish which species had precedence in territorial disputes based on their objectively measured combat prowess. Unfortunately, like most bureaucracies, the system quickly became rigid, outdated, and comically misguided. At the top of this hierarchy sat the Cthar, a crystalline, energy-based species from the radiation-soaked world of Cryos Prime. Their bodies were lattices of living crystal that channeled and amplified energy, allowing them to project devastating force blasts and generate impenetrable shields. Their natural armor could withstand direct hits from most conventional weapons, and their methodical, calculating minds made them formidable strategists. For nearly 2 centuries, they had maintained their position as the consortium's top-ranked combatants, a fact they took immense pride in despite claiming to be above such primitive distinctions. The Cthar representatives to the consortium, translucent, angular beings who communicated through pulses of colored light, frequently reminded other species of their ranking, particularly during resource allocation negotiations. Their dominance had gone largely unchallenged since the brief uprising of the Vrox 50 years prior. The Vrox, massive insectoid creatures with natural biological weaponry and hive-mind tactical coordination, had briefly contested the Cthara's position after demonstrating their ability to overwhelm 3 consortium defense fleets simultaneously. Their challenge had ultimately failed when the Cthar deployed specialized resonance weapons that disrupted the Vrox hive mind, causing mass confusion in their ranks. Still, the Vrox maintained a respectable second place in the combat rankings, a position they had used to secure valuable mining rights in the Scylla Nebula. Both species exemplified what the consortium valued in its combat metrics: raw destructive capability, natural defenses, and tactical coordination. Both had evolved on harsh, unforgiving worlds where survival depended on dominance. Both could destroy entire settlements without technological assistance if they chose. Both would soon learn how deeply flawed the consortium's ranking system truly was. The Grendelites arrived without warning or invitation. Their massive ships, resembling enormous predatory fish with metallic scales and glowing red sensory nodes, appear at the edge of consortium space and immediately began making their way toward the central administrative hub, ignoring all hails and warnings. When they finally deigned to communicate, the galaxy got its first glimpse of them: 12-foot-tall bipeds with exoskeletons resembling burnished titanium, for powerful arms ending in retractable blades, and faces dominated by multiple sensory organs arranged in what looked unsettlingly like a permanent snarl. They evolved on Grend, a super Jupiter with crushing gravity and an atmosphere thick with metallic compounds, an environment that made even Cryos Prime seem hospitable by comparison. Their representative, a particularly massive specimen with scarified exoskeletal plates, delivered a simple message to the hastily assembled consortium council. "We are Grendelites. We have observed your species. We have studied your capabilities. We have determined that we are superior to all. We will now demonstrate this fact and assume our rightful position as the dominant force in this region of space." The Council's attempts at diplomatic responses were met with dismissive gestures from the Grendelites' secondary limbs, apparently their equivalent of swatting away an annoying insect. "Your hierarchical combat rating system interests us," the Grindalite continued. We will use it to formally establish our supremacy. Prepare your champions. Within days, reports flooded in of Grindalite scouts challenging representatives of various mid-tier species to one-on-one combat, defeating them with terrifying efficiency and leaving them alive but humiliated. The pattern was clear. They were working their way up the combat hierarchy, methodically establishing their dominance before eventually challenging the Cthar. Emergency sessions of the Consortium Council devolved into chaos. The Cthar representatives pulsed with agitated vermilion light as they demanded the Grindalites be sanctioned for violating proper challenge protocols. The Vrock's emissaries chittered nervously among themselves, their collective mind calculating scenarios and finding few favorable outcomes. Lesser-ranked species demanded protection or threatened to withdraw from the consortium entirely. Ambassador Tholak of the Minion Federation, a species ranked a respectable 7th due to their telekinetic abilities, summarized the situation with unusual bluntness. The system that was meant to prevent conflict has become the very framework for a new one. Perhaps we should reconsider the wisdom of ranking sentient beings by their ability to harm others. His suggestion was immediately tabled for future consideration. The consortium, after all, excelled at bureaucracy, not innovation. Meanwhile, the Grindalites continued their methodical campaign, defeating representatives from the 12th-ranked Bolivar Collective, whose corrosive touch proved ineffective against Grindalite exoskeletons, and the 9th-ranked Chintal Unity, whose psychic attacks seemed to slide off Grindalite minds like water off glass. As fear spread through consortium space, the Grindalite High Command gathered to discuss their next move. Their leader, Supreme Vanquisher Zorg, was growing impatient with the predictable victories. These challenges lack glory. Zorg's metallic voice resonated through their command ship. Each victory merely confirms what we already know. We need a more instructive display. His chief strategist, combat theorist Malx, manipulated a holographic display of the consortium's combat rankings. Perhaps a different approach would be more efficient, Supreme Vanquisher. Instead of climbing each rung of this ladder, we could demonstrate the fundamental flaw in their system. Explain, Zorg commanded, his upper limbs clicking together in interest. We defeat their strongest, yes, but what if we also defeat their weakest? A species so far beneath notice that their destruction would emphasize the totality of our dominance? It would be poetic. Zorg's sensory clusters pulsed with approval. Find me the species. Find me their most isolated representative. We will make an example that none can ignore. Malx's exoskeleton vibrated with what passed for laughter among Grindalites. I have already identified the perfect target. The display shifted to show a small, unimpressive craft drifting near the edges of the newly discovered Whispering Spiral Nebula. The ship's designation appeared, the Plucky Wanderer, Earth Registry. The pilot's data followed, Elias Vance, human, Terran, species combat ranking, 41, effectively harmless. Humans, Malx explained, are one of the few species ranked below minimal threat that still maintain deep space operations. They are soft-bodied, possess no natural weapons or defenses, and have unexceptional sensory capabilities. Their only notable traits are their adaptability and endurance, which the consortium considers irrelevant in combat scenarios. Zorg studied the information with growing satisfaction. Perfect. Send Forlag the Unyielding. Tell him to make it memorable. Elias Vance was having a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, which in deep space meant he was simultaneously bored out of his mind and meticulously focused on not dying. The Whispering Spiral Nebula, named for the peculiar radio emissions that sounded disturbingly like whispers when processed through standard communication equipment, was a newly discovered region rich in exotic elements and scientific opportunities. It was also notoriously unstable, with gravity eddies that could appear without warning, pockets of volatile gases that could ignite with the smallest energy discharge, and radiation streams that would fry standard sensors. Naturally, the consortium had sent a human to map it. Another day, another data point. Elias muttered to himself as he adjusted the Wanderer's mapping array. At 43, he had spent nearly half his life in the void, taking the assignments other species considered too tedious, too dangerous, or too insignificant for their valuable members. Humanity's low ranking in the consortium's hierarchy meant they were often assigned the space equivalent of scrubbing toilets. The plucky Wanderer reflected its pilot's status, a utilitarian craft built more for reliability than comfort, with systems that favored redundancy over sophistication. Its most advanced features are the custom-designed environmental sensors Elias had installed himself, modifications that made the ship particularly adept at detecting and navigating hazardous regions like the Whispering Spiral. Elias's cabin was sparse but personalized, a collection of old Earth books, paper being a curiosity among most spacefaring species, a coffee maker he'd modified to work in varying gravitational conditions, and a vintage music player currently filling the cabin with the sounds of 20th century jazz. His workspace was meticulously organized, a habit developed during his previous career as a disaster response specialist on Earth, before bureaucratic frustrations drove him to seek solitude among the stars. What his official consortium file didn't mention was his extensive experience in zero-gravity rescue operations during the lunar colony collapse, his certification in 15 different environmental survival protocols, or his unofficial record for longest solo survival after a ship decompression incident. It also failed to note his almost pathological resourcefulness or his habit of modifying standard equipment into decidedly non-standard configurations. The consortium saw only a small, soft-bodied mammal from a backward planet, assigned him a number, and sent him to places where his presumed failure would have minimal impact on important operations. Elias was in the process of documenting an unusual radiation pattern when his proximity sensors blared to life. He glanced at the display, expecting to see a rogue asteroid or perhaps a pocket of condensing gases. Instead, he found himself looking at the largest, most intimidating ship he had ever encountered. It resembled a prehistoric predator, all angles and armored plates, with what appeared to be actual blades extending from its forward section. The vessel was easily 20 times the size of the Wanderer, its hull adorned with what Elias recognized as battle trophies, fragments of other ships mounted like grisly ornaments. "Well," he said to the empty cabin, "that's not in the standard identification database." His communication system activated without his input, the screen filling with the image of what could only be described as a walking weapon. The Grindelite commander, Forlag, was even more imposing than his ship, a towering figure with an exoskeleton that looked like it could deflect laser fire, from massive arms ending in retractable blades that gleamed under the command ship's lights, and multiple eyes arranged in clusters that gave the unsettling impression of constantly calculating kill shots. Human. The creature's voice rumbled through the speakers, a sound like grinding metal that the translator struggled to process. "I am Forlag the Unyielding, champion of the Grindelite Dominion. Your existence is now forfeit." Elias blinked twice, set down his coffee mug, and straightened in his chair. "Good morning to you, too. I'm Elias Vance of Earth. I'm conducting a survey of the Whispering Spiral Nebula under Consortium Authorization CR 7734. Can I help you with something?" The question seemed to momentarily confuse the Grindelite, whose eye clusters narrowed and expanded in sequence. "You do not understand, soft one. I am not requesting assistance. I am informing you of your imminent defeat." Elias nodded slowly. "I gathered that from the existence forfeit bit. Just try to establish a dialogue here. Are you having ship troubles? The nebula can play havoc with navigational systems. I've mapped several safer corridors if you're just passing through." Forlag's secondary arms slashed the air in what Elias interpreted as frustration. "I am not passing through. I have come specifically to defeat you in honorable combat, to demonstrate the superiority of the Grindelite Dominion over even the weakest species in the consortium." "Ah," Elias said, reaching for his coffee again. "A political statement. Got it." He took a sip, considering the massive alien warship and its clearly agitated commander. This wasn't the first time he'd encountered aggression in deep space. though usually it came from pirates or territorial disputes, not whatever this was. So, just to be clear, Elias continued, you've tracked me down, specifically me, to what? Fight me? Kill me? Make some sort of point to the consortium? Yes. Forlag seemed pleased by this understanding. You will face me in personal combat. Your defeat will be recorded and transmitted throughout consortium space as evidence of Grindelite supremacy across all spectrums of capability. Elias set his mug down again and leaned forward. Let me see if I follow your logic here. You're challenging species based on their combat ranking. You want to beat the best, which I assume would be the Cthar, to show you're the top predator. But you also want to beat the worst? And that's me. Precisely. The totality of our dominance will be undeniable. Elias rubbed his temples. Except that's not really how it works, is it? Beating me doesn't prove anything about your species compared to others. It just proves you personally can beat me personally. The sample size is statistically irrelevant. The Grindelite's blade arms extended fully in what appeared to be irritation. Your primitive understanding of honor combat is noted but irrelevant. Will you face me, or will you die without the opportunity to defend yourself? Those options are not great, Elias admitted, but I'm curious. Do I get any say in the parameters of this honor combat? Forlag's eye clusters pulsed with what might have been surprise. You wish to negotiate terms? This is unexpected. I'm full of surprises, Elias said dryly. If we're doing this, I propose we fight here in the nebula using environment suits. No ships, no additional weapons beyond what we can personally carry. Now all four of Forlag's arms moved in complex patterns as he conferred with someone off-screen. When he returned his attention to Elias, his voice carried a note of what sounded suspiciously like amusement. You propose combat in an environment that would kill an unprotected being within minutes? With a creature whose natural weapons can pierce standard environment suits with minimal effort. Forlag's metallic voice reverberated. Your species' reputation for irrational behavior appears accurate. Elias shrugged. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. I accept your terms, human. It will make your defeat all the more instructive. Prepare yourself. We commence in 1 standard hour. The communication ended, leaving Elias staring at his reflection in the darkened screen. Well, he said to himself, this should be interesting. He spent the next hour carefully preparing his environmental suit. Not the standard consortium model, but a heavily modified version he'd adapted for the extreme conditions of nebula exploration. He checked each seal twice, verified the integrity of his helmet, and loaded his utility belt with a carefully selected array of tools and emergency supplies. As an afterthought, he activated the Wanderer's automated distress protocols, set to trigger if his vital signs ceased or if he didn't return within 6 hours. Just before sealing his helmet, he took one last sip of coffee, savoring the bitter warmth. Here's to terrible ideas. He toasted the empty cabin, then secured his helmet and cycled through the airlock. Outside, the nebula was a swirling canvas of cosmic art, streams of ionized gases painting purples, blues, and greens across the void, punctuated by the distant glitter of forming stars. Under different circumstances, Elias might have paused to appreciate the view. Instead, his attention was fixed on the massive Grindelite emerging from an airlock on the opposing vessel. Forlag's environmental suit was clearly military-grade, its design emphasizing mobility and protection while accommodating his 4 arms and blade extensions. The Grindelite moved with surprising grace despite the crushing mass of his exoskeleton, using small thruster bursts to propel himself toward Elias. I will make this quick, human. Forlag's voice came through the communication channel. Though not painless, Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he used his suit's thrusters to move laterally, angling toward a particularly dense cloud of ionized particles he'd mapped earlier. His movement seemed erratic, almost panicked, prompting a rumbling sound from Forlag that the translator identified as laughter. Running already? Your species' cowardice is legendary, but I expected at least a token resistance. Elias finally responded, his voice calm despite his rapid breathing. Not running, just picking my battlefield. He disappeared into the particle cloud, the dense matter temporarily obscuring him from both visual tracking and standard sensors. Forlag charged forward, his superior propulsion system quickly closing the distance. A futile delay, the Grindelite commander announced as he plunged into the cloud after Elias. My sensory capabilities exceed yours by several. His boast was cut short as his suit's external sensors suddenly screamed warnings. The particle cloud wasn't just dense, it was highly charged, and Elias's passage had disrupted its delicate electromagnetic balance. Miniature lightning storms erupted around Forlag, the electrical discharges interfering with his suit systems and temporarily overwhelming his sensory clusters. By the time Forlag reoriented himself and emerged from the cloud, Elias was nowhere to be seen. The human had used the distraction to change direction and was now positioning himself near a field of debris, remnants of an ancient asteroid that had been pulled apart by the nebula's competing gravitational forces. Clever, Forlag acknowledged, adjusting his trajectory to intercept. But ultimately futile. You cannot hide from me for long, and you cannot harm me at all. Elias's voice came through clearly despite the interference from the nebula. Who said anything about hiding? I'm just getting started. What followed was not the quick, brutal confrontation Forlag had anticipated. Instead, it became a deadly game of cat and mouse through one of the most hazardous environments in known space. Only the roles of predator and prey kept shifting in ways that increasingly frustrated the Grindelite champion. Physically, the contest was absurdly one-sided. Forlag's strength, natural weapons, and armored exoskeleton made him capable of tearing Elias apart with minimal effort, if he could catch him. The human's inferior physiology was offset by his intimate knowledge of the nebula's dangers and his surprising agility in zero-gravity conditions. When Forlag did manage to close the distance, deploying his blade arms with deadly precision, Elias used the debris field to his advantage, positioning himself so that Forlag's powerful strikes instead hit chunks of metallic asteroid. Several times, the Grindelite's blades became momentarily lodged in the dense material, giving Elias precious seconds to escape. "Stand and fight, coward!" Forlag roared after Elias evaded him for the third time by slipping through a gap in the debris too narrow for the Grindelite's bulky frame. "Why would I do that?" Elias replied, his breathing labored but his voice steady. "This is fighting, just not the kind you're used to." He demonstrated his point by using his suit's tools to dislodge a precariously balanced chunk of asteroid, timing it perfectly so that it drifted into Forlag's path. The Grindelite easily batted it aside, but the impact threw off his trajectory just enough to send him tumbling into a pocket of superheated gas that Elias had carefully avoided. Forlag's suit alarms blared as the external temperature spiked dangerously. His armor protected him from serious damage, but the thermal sensors in his exoskeleton registered pain, an unfamiliar sensation for a being accustomed to being the most dangerous entity in any environment. "Your tactics are dishonorable," Forlag accused, stabilizing himself and renewing his pursuit. "Never agreed to your honor code," Elias shot back, "just to the location and equipment limitations." As the deadly dance continued, a pattern emerged. Elias couldn't hurt Forlag directly, but he could lead him into one environmental hazard after another. Radiation pockets that interfered with suit systems, microgravity eddies that disrupted navigation, clouds of magnetically charged particles that clung to Forlag's metallic exoskeleton and threw off his balance. Each encounter left the Grindelite physically unharmed, but increasingly disoriented and frustrated. His attacks grew wilder, his strategies more reckless. Meanwhile, Elias maintained a defensive posture, conserving energy and relying on his superior knowledge of the terrain. An hour into the conflict, Forlag's communications took on a note of genuine bewilderment beneath the rage. "How are you doing this? You are weak, soft. Your species is ranked at the bottom of the combat hierarchy." "Maybe the hierarchy measures the wrong things," Elias suggested, narrowly avoiding a swipe that would have severed his oxygen line. He used his momentum to swing around a small, dense asteroid, using its mass to slingshot himself in an unexpected direction. The maneuver carried him toward a phenomenon he'd mapped days earlier, a gravitational anomaly that created unpredictable tidal forces in the surrounding space. It was one of the many dangers that made the Whispering Spiral so treacherous, and one Elias had marked with particular caution in his charts. "You know what they don't teach you in domination school?" Elias called out, positioning himself just at the edge of the anomaly's influence. "The difference between being dangerous and being a predator." Forelag charged forward, sensory clusters fixed on Elias with single-minded fury. "There is no difference. I am both." "That's where you're wrong," Elias replied. "A true predator understands patience, efficiency, and environment. You're just a weapon looking for a target." As Forelag closed the final distance, blade arms extended for a killing blow, Elias made his move. With precise timing, he fired his suit's thrusters at maximum burn, shooting upward relative to Forelag's approach. The sudden maneuver left the Grendolite slashing at empty space and carried him directly into the gravitational anomaly's influence. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Forelag's massive form was caught in competing gravitational fields, his momentum amplified and redirected in ways he couldn't predict or counter. His thrusters fired erratically as he attempted to stabilize, but each correction only worsened his situation, sending him tumbling deeper into the anomaly's grip. Warning alarms blared through his communication channel as his suit's systems registered the mounting stress on his exoskeleton. For perhaps the first time in his combat career, Forelag experienced not just frustration, but genuine fear. "What is happening?" he demanded, his metallic voice distorted by interference. "What have you done?" "Just introduced you to a little phenomenon we call a gravity eddy," Elias explained, maintaining a safe distance while carefully monitoring the anomaly's behavior. "It's temporary, forms and dissipates within hours, but while it's active, it's essentially a miniature version of a black hole's event horizon. Not strong enough to crush you, but more than enough to trap you until it naturally disperses, which should be in about, 5 hours. Forelag's struggles grew more desperate as he realized the nature of his predicament. "This is not victory. You have not defeated me in combat." "Didn't I?" Elias countered. "I used my knowledge and skills to neutralize a superior opponent. Where I come from, that's the definition of winning a fight." He watched as Forelag continued to battle against the implacable forces of physics, his mighty strength rendered irrelevant by the fundamental laws of the universe. After ensuring that the Grendolite was thoroughly trapped but not in mortal danger, Elias began making his way back to the Wanderer. "I'll send your coordinates to your ship once I'm safely away," he promised. "They should be able to extract you once the eddy dissipates. Consider this a learning experience." The Grendolite's response was lost in a burst of interference as Elias moved out of communication range, leaving the galaxy's self-proclaimed greatest predator caught in a trap laid by what was supposed to be the easiest prey. 3 days later, a thoroughly exhausted Elias Vance docked the plucky Wanderer at Consortium Outpost Gamma 9, the nearest administrative hub to the Whispering Spiral Nebula. Behind him, secured in a specially modified cargo container, was the imposing figure of Forelag the Unyielding, significantly less unyielding after his extraction from the gravitational anomaly had required the combined tractor beams of 3 Grendolite vessels and still resulted in damage to his exoskeletal structure. The reception committee awaiting Elias was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Instead of the usual board customs official scanning his identification and waving him through, he found a delegation of high-ranking consortium representatives, including members of species he'd only seen in official broadcasts. Their expressions, those he could interpret, ranged from disbelief to barely concealed excitement. Elias Vance, the senior consortium adjudicator, a tall minion with shimmering telepathic nodes, greeted him formally. "You have been at the center of a rather significant incident." Elias shrugged, too tired to maintain full diplomatic protocol. "Not by choice, adjudicator. I was just doing my job when I was attacked." Indeed, the adjudicator cast a meaningful glance at the cargo container where Forlag was being held. And yet, the outcome of this attack has created quite the diplomatic situation. Word of the encounter had spread through consortium space with unprecedented speed, outpacing even Elias's journey to the outpost. The initial reports transmitted by the Grindelite ship that had eventually retrieved their humiliated champion had been met with disbelief, then frantic verification, and finally a kind of stunned acceptance that threw the entire combat classification system into chaos. The Cthar delegation, their crystalline bodies pulsing with agitated energy patterns, demanded immediate recalibration of the system. The Vrox, sensing opportunity in the disruption, suggested that perhaps adaptability should be weighted more heavily than raw strength in future assessments. Lesser-ranked species cited Elias's victory as evidence that the entire hierarchy needed fundamental restructuring. Meanwhile, the Grindelites had withdrawn from their campaign of challenges, their diplomatic representatives attempting to frame Forlag's defeat as an anomalous outcome not representative of true combat conditions, a claim undermined by their own insistence on recording and transmitting the encounter as proof of their dominance. The recording itself had become something of an underground sensation throughout consortium space, with numerous species finding unexpected inspiration in the sight of a physically outmatched human outsmarting one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. The Grindelite delegation has requested their champion's immediate return, the adjudicator informed Elias. They have also filed a formal protest regarding your dishonorable tactics. I followed the agreed parameters exactly, Elias pointed out. No ships, no weapons beyond what we could personally carry, combat within the nebula environment. Not my fault he didn't bother learning about the battlefield before charging in. The adjudicator's telepathic nodes flickered with what might have been amusement, a point that has been made repeatedly in the emergency council sessions. The Grindelite's complaint has been noted and filed appropriately. What the adjudicator didn't mention was that the appropriate filing had been in the recently created complaints rendered invalid by complainant's own standards category, a diplomatic way of telling the Grindelites that by their own combat-centric value system, they had no grounds to object to defeat. So what happens now? Elias asked, eyeing the assembled delegation warily. Am I in trouble? Quite the contrary, Mr. Vance. The consortium finds itself in your debt. The Grindelite campaign was causing significant destabilization throughout our territory. Their defeat, particularly in the manner you achieved it, has forced a reevaluation that many believe is long overdue. Over the following weeks, that reevaluation took concrete form. The combat classification system, after 3 centuries as the backbone of consortium power dynamics, was officially suspended pending comprehensive review. In its place, a temporary capability assessment framework was established, incorporating factors beyond mere destructive potential, including adaptability, problem-solving, environmental mastery, and innovation. Under this new framework, humanity's ranking rose dramatically from 41st, effectively harmless, to 12th, significant potential. A reassessment that came with increased representation in consortium affairs and access to previously restricted resources and territories. The Cthar, while technically maintaining their top position, found their influence somewhat diminished as the new metrics revealed limitations in their adaptive capabilities. The Vrox, with their hive mind problem-solving, actually gained standing, and the Grindelites, despite their formidable physical capabilities, were classified as specialized combatants rather than the universal dominators they claimed to be. Forlag himself, upon his return to Grindelite space, was neither executed for his failure nor celebrated for his experience. Instead, he was reassigned to what his culture considered perhaps the most humiliating position possible, a teacher of combat theory for juvenile Grindelites, with his encounter with Elias Vance serving as a mandatory case study in the dangers of underestimating opponents and environments. As for Elias, he submitted his report on the incident with his characteristic understatement, mapping operation temporarily delayed due to unforeseen diplomatic interaction. Some equipment damaged during environmental demonstration. Request for placement atmospheric analyzer and standard post-encounter psychological evaluation. His request for immediate reassignment back to the Whispering Spiral was granted with surprising speed, though he noticed his new commission came with a significant equipment upgrade and a modest increase in hazard pay. More surprising was the personal message from the Consortium High Adjudicator thanking him for his contribution to interspecies understanding. Bureaucratic language for having taught a valuable lesson to a dangerous aggressor without triggering a full-scale diplomatic crisis. 2 months after the incident, Elias sat in the newly refurbished cabin of the Plucky Wanderer, once again mapping the treacherous beauty of the nebula. His workspace remained meticulously organized, his music collection continued to favor Earth classics, and his coffee maker still required occasional percussive maintenance to function properly. The only new addition was a small trophy mounted beside his navigation console, a fragment of Grindelite exoskeleton that had broken off during Forlag's extraction from the gravity eddy. Beneath it, on a small handwritten card, were the words, "Galaxy's most dangerous babysitter." As he charted another gravitational anomaly, carefully marking it for future navigators, Elias reflected on the irony of it all. In a galaxy obsessed with categorizing and ranking everything, sometimes the most valuable lesson was learning that the true measure of capability wasn't what you could destroy, but what you could understand. Not how hard you could hit, but how smartly you could adapt. And perhaps most importantly, that appearances, whether crystalline energy beings, four-armed armored predators, or soft-skinned primates from an unremarkable blue planet, could be the most dangerous deception of all.